Okay, ladies and gents, what's up? It's your favorite Asian robot, and one day I'll be your favorite Diablo 4 content creator. Today I'm gonna teach you how damage buckets work, and basically how people reach the insane astronomical numbers that you guys see in those crazy videos, things like that. I'm not gonna give you the actual damage formula. That's gonna take a lot more research on your side if you want to really see how all this works, but I'm gonna give you a general idea. Now, first and foremost, what I want to tell you is that you can actually learn about this on your own. Okay, if you're interested. The basic explanation that I'm going to give you is actually based on this article by Game Rant. All right, it's literally called Diablo 4 Damage Buckets Explained. The link will be in the description of this video. All right, and it gives you a very loose idea of how damage buckets work, as well as gives you some links, resources to where the actual post comes from, and you can probably go and figure out and consult more people who have actually done the numbers dive. There's a lot of number crunching that goes into this, but I'm going to explain to you the core principles behind this so that even if you're not a math wizard, you can understand how we do these things and how we try to achieve the best possible damage numbers on our characters. First and foremost, let's take a look at the actual game, all right? If you look at any weapon or item in the game, it'll tell you plus vulnerable damage, plus skill, critical damage with bone skills, plus damage to enemies afflicted by shadow damage, plus core skill damage. All of this, like, which ones multiply together and which ones add together? It's confusing, right? You know, there are so many of these offensive stats, like which one, hey, listen, give me an idea here, which one actually comes together to give me something better, you know? You're not telling me any of this, right? You're showing me all these stats. But if you follow the guidance, there is a fairly easy way of understanding how all of this works and how all of it can create those insanely large numbers, okay? I am here to give you that understanding, okay? And just as a treat, in case people don't know, I'm half Indian, so I'll give you the Indian accent when we're doing the math part, okay? All right, that'll just keep you entertained, because I know it's a lot easier to swallow this when it's a funnier lesson, all right? So, let's go to this article. I'm just going to refer to one important thing, which I'm just going to give you a quick overview of, and then I will have the actual spreadsheet to show you the numbers, you know, visually, so you can understand, all right? First and foremost, if you go to the Game Rant article and we scroll down, basically, they say that there are 5 damage buckets, and roughly I have found this to be true as well, okay? The 5 damage buckets are, you know, loosely, like I said, loosely, because some of the others fit into these buckets, some don't. One example is which I think may be nerfed, I don't know, we'll have to wait till the actual patch notes, but Serration, aspect of Serration, I believe is its own damage bucket, which means it's another multiplier on top of the 5 that you already see, which is how numbers can get even crazier, right? But just to, you know, get back to the point, first and foremost, damage buckets work according to 5 different multipliers, okay? Things that are within the same bucket, these are the 5 damage buckets. Things that are within the same bucket add with each other, okay? So the 5 buckets are main attribute, strength, dexterity, intelligence, willpower, all right, whichever one's the main attribute for your skill. In the case of the necromancer, this would be intelligence, right? X percentage damage, so percentage physical damage, percentage bone skill damage, you know, including skill damage as stated up there. All right, all of this will be added together. Then there's crit damage, all right, which comes base at 50%, okay? But you can increase it through the various affixes on your rings, whatever, blah, 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 okay? This will trigger when there's a crit. Plus damage includes damage versus, so damage versus crowd controlled, damage while berserk, damage versus bleeding targets, etc., so on and so forth, you know? And then vulnerable damage is its own bucket by itself, okay? Which is how those numbers get crazy. Let's take a look at this in a visual sense, okay? Alright guys, as promised to you, I'm going to use the Indian accent, alright? So the first thing that you need to understand, okay, when we start to do the mathematics, alright, you have the base damage, and let us assume in this particular situation that the base damage is 100, okay? So with the base damage of 100, the main attribute, we're going to assume here that it is 10%, okay? And if we multiply the 100 by the 10% increase in the main attribute, you will end up with 110 damage. This is achieved because when you increase 100 by 110%, you're going to get 110. All right. There's a final damage here, but I'm going to show you the stage by stage multiplication so that you can understand exactly how the mathematics works. Okay, so then let us use the attribute of a core skill damage. Okay, we assume that this is a 10% increase. Then you'll see that the 110 will then be multiplied by the next bucket, the second bucket. So this 110 is further multiplied by a 10%, and then this you achieve the result of having 121. All right, this is now if you were to multiply the 100 by the 10%, as I told you before, the increase okay, between point A and point B, if we were to check the increase here would be 10. But now, all right, if we suggest the autofill, which will show you all of this in general, okay, we're going to reformat this away from, we're just going to put it as a number, okay, and then we are going to take this one but minus this one, and you can see the increase here. Okay, you can see the increase, and hang on, I'll just do this formula for the rest as well. Sometimes these Excel sheets don't format correctly, but that's okay. Take this one minus this one. Okay, now I want you to understand that the increase, as you can see, it is more than if you were to multiply 100 by 10%. When you multiply 100 by 10%, the increase is only 10. But in the second multiplication, when we take 110, obviously it is a larger number. When we multiply it by 10% again, we get 121, and the increase is 11. And then in a third stage, all right, you are seeing 121 multiplied by 10%. All right, so 110%, the answer is 133, and then the actual increase ends up at 12. At 12 from the previous number of 121. This is how the damage buckets can multiply your damage, because you are not taking the simple increase. So if you were to add all of these damage buckets up, which ends up at 50% here, if the buckets were additive instead of multiplicative, the final damage, instead of being 161, it would end up at 150, because you're simply taking this simple number of 50% here and multiplying 100 by 50. As you can see, there is a clear difference between this 150. The difference would be this 150 minus from the final damage here. Okay. Oh, sorry. It would be the opposite way around to give the more proper difference. It would be 161 minus from 150. You'd end up with a difference of 11. This is a initially small difference, but what happens if we change the numbers so that the numbers are much larger and more representative of what we actually have in the game? I'm going to do another test example, all right, but we're going to use some of the facts from my necromancer, at least for the main attribute. So for the main attribute, my necromancer has about 380 intelligence. So we'll put 380 there. That is a 38% increase from the main attribute. From the core skill damage and from the other types of skill damage, in general, most characters would have about at least 100. So we'll have that as a second multiplier. The critical damage multiplier as the baseline is often 50, and usually it is very easy to reach beyond 100. So we will just use a multiplier of 120. It is an arbitrary number, all right, but I just want to show you how we can create these astronomical numbers that you're seeing in the game. So critical multiplier is now 120. Then the damage versus close, it is very easy to bring it beyond 70, 80, this kind of thing. But for the sake of this particular exercise, we will set it as 70, all right, which is just from my sword alone. And then finally, we will have the vulnerable damage. The vulnerable damage starts out at 20, but you can actually check in the game how much of vulnerable damage is, and mine is close to 160, but for arbitrary number's sake, we're just going to use 60% just to show you that the final damage is very drastically different from your base damage. Now, if the buckets were additive together, if all of this were added together, you would end up with a total increase of only 388%, which would lead to a final damage of 488. But if you were to actually multiply all these buckets together using the same methodology that I showed you before, you would end up with a final damage of 1651. This is 1163 damage more than if all of these buckets were additive. Are you starting to see the power of multiplication? Okay, now I'm sure you guys have had enough of the Indian accent by this point, but basically what I'm trying to show you guys is this. These damage buckets are all gonna multiply with each other and, you know, make your damage super strong. This is with a base damage of 100. What happens if we increase the scale by 10? 16,000, right? What happens if your vulnerable damage multiplier is 120? What happens if your damage versus close, crowd controlled, all that other shebang is about 180? What happens if your base damage per hit... Let's take a look at the actual numbers in game, right? Let's take a look at some more realistic numbers. This thing, base damage, hits about 17 to 21,000. So, excuse me, let's take a base of, say, 18,000 as the base hit. Okay? Are you starting to see these numbers get all freaking massive? Because that's exactly what's going to happen. All right. Let's format all of these as numbers so you can see. All right, we're gonna just bring them down without the decimal places so you guys don't have to struggle with that. Okay, we're just gonna... Sorry, accountant, so I gotta show you these. When you do it like this, all right, just by changing the base damage to a more reasonable number, and I haven't even touched any of the other numbers. Base damage at 18,000, I'm already dealing 673,000. Do you see the power and the effect of multiplying? It's so strong. You multiply the first one just by 38%. I end up at 24,000, right? Multiply that by the core skill damage, whatever other skill damages, by 100. I end up at 49,600. Just a crit multiplier of 120. And by the way, it's very easy to break past this number. Most people have a crit multiplier of about 200%, yeah? All right. Just by 120, it's already 100,000. Then damage versus close, whatever. Okay, let's take this down to, let's say you only have 120 here, but your crit multiplier, let's make it more realistic, because most people, honest to God, have about 200%, right? You get to 149,000 here, damage versus close, and all that kind of stuff. Damage versus bleeding, berserk, whatever. All that added together, 327,000. Then you add vulnerable damage multiplier, and all of a sudden, this thing jumps it up by almost double. The difference is even more than what was originally stated here. So all of this together, you are literally multiplying numbers on numbers, which is how these numbers reach astronomical heights. All right, so that is how basically everybody does their big numbers, and that's how you start to really see the big numbers, by focusing on increasing each of these different brackets as high as you can. All right, as high as you can. You are effectively increasing your total multiplier effect. That is why, for most characters, there needs to be a way for them to inflict vulnerable, and they need to increase their crit rate as much as possible. When they do so, they can take advantage of these two buckets, which are very easy to increase, because at least two affixes on your weapon, on your rings, whatever, can all contribute to this. And then, from your Paragon pathway, you get all the other cool stuff. The skill damages, the damage, you know, versus close enemies, the damage versus whatever enemies. You get all that. And of course, your main attribute as well. So when you put all of that together on your various items, you start to see some really big numbers. And this doesn't even count, like I said, the additional brackets. What if we were to just take this final damage, just as an example, all right? Take this final damage. Now I'm just going to show you. What if we were to multiply it by 1 plus, say, like my serration right now is 35%, okay? Just by that alone, I'm getting another 200,000 damage, just to show you, okay? If serration aspect counts as a separate bracket, I would go from 721,000 to 973,000, which you can kind of see in game. You can kind of see something close to this in game. So, this is what I want to highlight to you guys. This is why gear affixes are so crucial, because by having all the right multipliers, your damage goes insane. But if you don't have all the right multipliers, your damage is going to be low. You see? This is the numbers game, and this is why damage buckets are so important. Now that you understand damage buckets in more thorough detail, go off, you know, go and take this lesson with you, okay? Take this lesson, understand the mathematics and then start doing your own calculations, start to understand where you're putting your damage, and make sure you don't put everything into one bucket, because now I'm just going to explain to you the final rules of this kind of thing. So if there is damage that is in one particular category, so for example, damage versus close and damage while berserking are in the same category. Okay, damage again versus bleeding enemies is all in the same category. When you have all these types of damage in the same category, they will add with each other. So let's say you've got 70% damage versus close, and then you've got 30% damage versus bleeding. These two are going to add together. You're effectively going to have a bonus of 100. Okay, but if you were instead to have a different multiplier, for example, if you were to have intelligence at 15%, although it would be a completely lower bonus than the 30% from the bleeding damage, you would actually get a higher multiplier on the final result, because the final result will be closer, will have an 18% increase, but it is on a multiplier from the main attribute, which will contribute more than to just have the 30% increase. But of course, you must understand that there is some degree of mathematical miscalculation. Let me just show you with an example, right? This will be a lot easier to visualize if you understand the mathematics behind it. So let's take all the other multipliers. We would keep all the other multipliers consistent. All right. Let us set them all at 50%, critical at 100%, and vulnerable damage also at about 100%. Okay, this is to keep the numbers a bit smaller than we're used to, and we'll have the damage versus close as previously recognized. Okay, we will have the base main attribute at 38% and the damage versus close at 70%. Under the first circumstance, what I mentioned before, if we were to increase by 18%, which would mean at 180 here, all right, we would end up at the 80, we would end up at 560. So 560, all right, will multiplied in this way end up with a damage value of 286%. We're going to copy it and just paste it here temporarily. Okay, copy and paste it here, paste the values only. Okay, great. So now that we understand this, we're going to remodify the values again. So we'll take this back down to 38. 380, and then we will add the bleeding damage here for 100%, and you can use these types of loose calculations to see which one will be better. In this case, it does not actually meet with our expectations, because the 30% from damage versus bleeding supersedes the damage versus intelligence, even though it was an 18% multiplier and it should be multiplied through multiple times. The 30% versus bleeding is more important. You can use a rough calculator like this to see the differential values as to whether or not, you know, you can make your own like this in Excel. If you need me to teach a lesson on how to make this, I guess I can make a video teaching you how to make a simple calculator like this, but I'm sure there are already calculators out there on the internet that you can use, and you can assess whether or not any particular change in your equipment is going to change your values for the better, or it is going to change it for the worst. Okay, so I hope this can help you understand why it is so important to have certain attributes on your weapons, certain attributes on your rings. It is much better to multiply all of these together and get a final result. Okay, so now that I'm done with that, all right, I know this was a longer video, but I hope it really genuinely helps you guys to understand why all this is important. Okay, so now what I wanted to highlight with that, okay, and indeed, you know, my explanation was a bit jumbled, but just to reiterate, damage in different buckets, all right, multiply together, but damage within the same bucket adds together. And it doesn't necessarily mean that just because the damage is in a different bucket, all right, if the value is lower, right, it may not necessarily overcome damage within the same bucket, but of a higher value, because the increase within that particular bucket may result in a larger final number. So it is very important that you understand, at least loosely, what kind of increases are good, what kind of increases are bad. If you don't even understand the loose nature of these increases, you're gonna end up making the wrong choices. Here, if I were to go for 180 intelligence, right, just as an example, it's not gonna help my character. But if I were to go for, say, 30% extra damage while berserking, just as an example, my character is going to do far better, you know? So that's basically how it works. That's why damage buckets can get very confusing, but knowing the ideal stats in each circumstance is the correct thing to do. All right. Now I know it's very complex, but and this is the simplified version. FYI, this is not even the correct exact formula. No, I'm sure somebody else out there has probably made a calculator somewhere. If you find one, let me know. But basically, this gives you an idea, a loose, rough idea of how things are supposed to work. And from there, you can make your own decisions on, you know, how you want to structure your equipment, things like that. At the very least, now you know how these damage buckets work and why they work the way they do. Okay? Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you guys like the content that I do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. All right? The first 100 to 200 people that like a video are crucial to getting it out there. So if you're within the first 100, 200, I always say if you're within the first 1,000 people, please, I'm asking you kindly, like this video, share it on social media, even if you got 0 followers, it would help me tremendously. All right? And now a thank you to all of the lovely channel members and top supporters that make shenanigans like this possible. Let me start with my top tipper, Zane Hoagland, top super chatter, Zane Hoagland, top membership gifters, Sabingu, Mike Cawthorn, top super chatters, Mike Cawthorn, River Archer, Kenzo Hashirama, Ray's Reality, and Alien Frost. Thank you guys so much. And here are our top channel members as well. Death Dawning 92 at Plus Ultra, Jerry Fast, OG, Rogue Assassin, Zach FG at Prestige. Thank you guys so much. In terms of our honor robots, we've got Marcel, Kaishiwa, Bob John, Maxim Lotz, Corey Ryu, Devin Lashin, Mookie Mocha, Rena, Chase Taylor, Nathan Strong, Sabingu, Lady Neo, Joey Danze, Daraverse, Che D12, I'm Peep, Syed Assad, Coda CMF, Kami SMH, Conrad C, Nate the Great, Benjamin Savage. Thank you guys so much for keeping this channel running. I hope you guys will continue to support my content. You know, thank you very much for giving it a chance, and I'll see you guys for my next explanation video. All right? And I hope it was not too complex for you, okay? Don't worry, I know the mathematics can get a little bit crazy, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. See you on the next video.